Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the QB situations that some quarterbacks were drafted into in the draft this past weekend, but let's get into the 2025 draft. Never too early to look ahead a little bit, but we had a mock draft come out. We've had the odds for the number one overall pick come out, so I wanted to get to the number one overall pick first, honestly, and I wanted to break down, first of all, what these look like overall, but also... Wait, that's the mock first round. Okay, there we go. Let's get to the odds of the top first pick, and it's led by Shedeur Sanders. And in my eyes, I think the top first pick, at least right now, is a battle between three guys, or three quarterbacks in particular. Shedeur Sanders, Quinn Ewers, and Carson Beck. I think those are the three guys that, given the right season, could find their way into that top pick. Now, I would lean more towards Carson Beck or Quinn Ewers. I've said on here before, I think Carson Beck will be the number one overall pick next year just because of the season that I expect him to have. But I think Quinn Ewers is the other guy that has probably a better shot than Shedeur Sanders, partly just because there's going to be more games to be played for Quinn Ewers. I'd be very surprised if Shedeur and Colorado made it into the playoff. I'd be very surprised if... Honestly, there's a very real possibility they might miss a bowl game. I don't necessarily think that's going to happen, but it won't necessarily be the year where Shedeur is able to put remarkable tape out there and play on the biggest stages and do the things that a lot of the top picks have done in the past. So Quinn Ewers is someone that you expect to get into the playoff with that Texas team this year. You expect to possibly play in the SEC championship in his very first year and just have more games to put good things on tape. So I would lean towards the two guys there at plus 300 more than the guy at plus 100. But at the end of the day, Shedeur Sanders, the talent is off the charts. So if he can put together a remarkable year at Colorado, I think it's definitely on the table. And then you look down this list a little bit more, and you have some wild cards that absolutely could get their name into the situation. When I look at this list, I think there's a number of names that pop out. I think seeing Drew Aller that high is a very interesting thing. But when you look at the measurables, when you look at the arm talent, it's not that crazy to think that given the right year, a team could absolutely fall in love with that kid. Jalen Milroe is the one that I'm really watching, partly because this is a kid that it seems like he's already made a ton of progress throwing the ball, and it feels like he's starting to make those NFL-level throws that were really lacking a year ago, where it was pretty much, is he going to throw it 50 yards down the field, or is he going to dump it off to a running back type of vibe? I think he now has the ability to throw those deep crossers, throw the ones where you're going over a linebacker but under a safety, doing the things that are going to be required of him at the next level. It feels like he's taken a lot of steps forward, and then when you look at the athletic ability, I would totally understand how this guy, given the right year, could make a team be like, that's an entire offense over there. That's a guy that can totally transform our team the second he steps on the field. So while I don't necessarily expect him to be the number one overall pick, that's a guy that definitely has an outside shot and will be playing some big-time football to kind of show off that ability more and more. And then some guys kind of on the outside looking in. Connor Wegman and Noah Fafita are two guys that are really interesting going into this year. Now, I think both of them could probably benefit from maybe staying one more year after this year. Connor Wegman has struggled with some injuries. Noah Fafita just kind of breaking onto the scene at Arizona. So I think those are very much outside shots, but two guys that are very talented and definitely have some ridiculous arm talent. Connor Wegman's a guy that I think, because he's been off the field a little bit and had some injury troubles, people kind of forget just how talented this kid is capable of being. But very, very big fan of him. But then let's get to some other guys. There are tons of other positions in this draft that there's a real possibility that there will not be a quarterback taken number one overall. In fact, the mock draft that I have for you here in a second has a non-quarterback going number one overall, and the edge rushing position is always one that there's a huge premium put on. That's always one that seems to find its way towards the top. You had Trayvon Walker in 2021 taken number one overall at the edge rushing position, so wouldn't be necessarily surprised if that happened again. You have guys like James Pierce Jr., who I think is absolutely leading the pack here. Now, Mykel Williams is the one with the best odds here, but that surprised me a little bit, I'll be honest. Now, Mykel Williams, I expect to have a fantastic year and do just remarkable things for Georgia, but I just think James Pierce Jr. is the more complete guy, the guy that I expect to have the more productive year, maybe not the better year when you actually look at the tape, but I think in terms of number of sacks, number of tackle for losses, I think you'll see more from James Pierce Jr. But then you do have Michael Williams, who could have a fantastic year. You have Patrick Payton, who could have a remarkable year. Even someone like Abdul Carter, who's just absolutely remarkable, can do so many different things on the defensive side of the ball, I think could be a really, really interesting guy to watch. Another couple of guys that are super dynamic on, well, both sides of the ball is Travis Hunter, someone that you definitely will be watching towards the top of the draft. Now, I'd be a little bit surprised if he ended up going number one overall, barring some remarkable season in 2024. But this is a guy that definitely has claim to the top 10, maybe even the top 5, because the athletic ability is just off the charts. It's as good as any player that really I've ever seen, to be totally honest with you. Now, I don't think the playing wide receiver and corner thing will translate to the next level. I don't think that an NFL roster and an NFL team would really be open to that, but he's a remarkable corner. Even if he was just a corner, he would be right up here with the top of the draft picks this upcoming year. And then you have someone like Harold Perkins, who I think it really needs to be watched out for. He is so interesting. He is someone that I think was really poorly utilized a year ago at LSU, and can be an absolute game changer. Can be a guy when every time you turn on an LSU game, you're keep seeing number 4. You keep seeing number 4, and he's making different plays. It's not just, getting into the backfield and making a sack or making a tackle for loss. He's dropping back into coverage. He's breaking up passes. He's doing just remarkable stuff on the football field, and I think given the new staff that has been brought in there with Blake Baker and Bo Davis and all of the talent that has been brought in there on that staff, I think it just gives Harold Perkins a better leg to stand on, and then you can just soar after that. So Harold Perkins is the guy that I think as of right now probably is a little bit further away from that top pick or that top 5 pick that some people expected him to be even a year ago, but he could absolutely get that back in a hurry just because of the absolute unreal talent of this kid. But finally, there's 2 offensive tackles that I wanted to get into. Will Campbell is the guy that I think is probably the most likely tackle to be taken number 1 overall. Now, the other guy that I'm about to talk about, Kelvin Banks Jr., was taken earlier in the mock draft I'm about to show you, but I think both these guys are remarkably talented. They're as good of tackles as you will have in pretty much any draft. I think they probably would have gone after Joe Alt if they were in this draft, but not too far after. I think they likely would have been 2 and 3 on the board. They're just going into their junior year, so they can't. So both these guys are going to be huge prospects. One could get taken number 1 overall just because, depending on how things fall, some teams might need some offensive tackle help, and both these guys are absolutely ready to play in the NFL. They'd be ready to play in the NFL today, to be totally honest with you. But let's go to the mock draft, and let's see kind of how some of the people see this shaking out. Now, you have James Pierce Jr. up top. I think that is the guy that I would say, if you're a defensive player or if you're any non-quarterback really in this draft to be taken number 1 overall, that's where I'd go if I'm being honest. But then you have Kelvin Banks at 2, fantastic offensive tackle, would definitely be a huge help to Drake May up there. Obviously, this order can go any which way in the next year, but you have guys like Michael Williams jumping up the board. People see that athletic ability, and it really jumps off the page. So I think it's someone that will definitely get a lot of hype throughout the year, and I expect a huge year from him. So I would not be surprised if he found his way to a Trayvon Walker type year where he just shoots up draft boards. You had Shedeur Sanders going number 1 of the quarterbacks, going to the Titans, which would be a very interesting pick there. Got to make sure that Deion signs off, of course, but we'll see what happens. I feel like I've seen Quinn Ewers to the Raiders or the Seahawks in pretty much every single mock draft that I've seen, so definitely watching for that one. Carson Beck is going to be right after him. There's just so many good guys in this class. You have Cam Ward at 10 to the Saints is a very interesting one, a guy that can definitely play himself into a big-time payday at the end of the year. Abdul Carter is a guy that I'm watching very closely throughout this year because frankly, I think he's the best player, one of the best players in the entire country, and could leave the year being the best player in the entire country. Luther Burden was the number one wide receiver taken off the board. I think that's kind of a no-brainer now. Totori McMillan will have plenty to say about that, but Luther Burden's just off the charts good and someone that can absolutely transform a franchise very quickly. You have Mason Graham and Walter Nolan here, two defensive tackles that are going to be absolutely huge at the next level. Will Johnson going a little bit later in the first round, but a fantastic guy that absolutely will make a difference here. Princely Umanmielen going at 22. The Falcons is a very interesting one. Transferring, didn't necessarily hit the full stride at Florida, but has a huge chance ahead of him, and definitely I think will have a huge year, especially with Walter Nolan right next to him. Jalen Milroe going in the first round. Talik Williams is a fantastic piece for Ohio State this year. You have other guys down the list. You have Evan Stewart, who just made his way to Oregon. You have Isaiah Bond, who just made his way to Texas on here. Shamar Stewart is definitely a guy to watch throughout this process. Emory Jones, the offensive tackles over at LSU are just off the charts good. And Tyler Booker might be my favorite guy in this upcoming year just because he's an absolute force on the inside and will make guys just straight up quit. So this is going to be a really, really fun year to watch, a really, really fun draft to watch. Obviously, we are well away from any of this being set in stone. But at the end of the day, there is so much talent across pretty much every position in the next year's draft of that top-end talent. It feels like it's across the board. You have the quarterbacks, the three up top, I think are going to be just incredible prospects once we get to that day, although there are some people that are a little bit more skeptical. You have Luther Burden and Totori McMillan at wide receiver. You have James Pierce Jr. and Michael Williams at edge rusher. It just feels like there's so much talent in this class at every single position, so it's going to be really fun to watch to see how this unfolds. Obviously, there's tons to still be said for a lot of these players, but some, pop up in the last year. In the last year, you have Jaden Daniels, who got very little talk and then burst onto the scene. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if some guys find their way up that board. But for the time being, I think it seems like it's Shedeur Sanders, Carson Beck, Quinn Ewers are the guys that really are battling for that top spot if it does end up going quarterback. But let's take our final break here, and when we come back, we have a Top 10 Tuesday for you guys. And I'm going to give you my top players for the the College Football 25 cover. There have been a lot of talk about the cover athletes and who those could be, some parameters around those. Wanted to get into some of my favorite picks and some guys that I think would definitely be great people to grace that cover. So stick with us and we will be right back with that.